they had all those games like the early 90s where you'd like try to type in a word as
Yep.
a thing was coming down to blow up your city. But no. But now we are looking ahead to the future and the next normal for IT trends in 2026.
Perfect transition, Ryan. So, welcome everybody. I'm Will McPhee, President of System Support, and this is a series we're hoping to do each year for peering into the crystal ball, seeing what IT trends are going to come up, make some predictions, and then hold ourselves accountable to what those predictions were. Because I think it's important if you make a pick, see if it was actually right or not, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get the feedback for making better decisions. So let's see what changed, what stuck, and what's coming next. So for a year in review, it wasn't necessarily about nailing a prediction exactly right, but it's definitely more about trends and the direction and the momentum that things are starting to go in because it's maybe you don't know exactly where the ship will be and at what time, but if you know it's heading that direction, you can start to prepare for it. And I think it's important to nail for our track record of what it came to when spotting those trends. So the big one for me was browser security, and my prediction for 2025 was that browser security, locking down Google Chrome, locking down Firefox or Microsoft Edge was going to be a bigger focus. But some tools emerged here and there, but adoption really lagged. I didn't see anything that was really key. I really thought that Microsoft, as part of the Intune system, was going to have a lot of built-in Windows Defender extending itself to the browser to be able to try and catch those nasty "your computer is infected, call this number" pop-ups, or anything that was stealing a token from clicking on a link in an email.
Hmm.
I have not seen it, even though that still seems to be the overwhelming, business email compromise happens. Spam filters do a lot, but nothing beats the, hey, it's a Dropbox looking file sent from a customer that you've talked to a lot. So, those tools are out there, and it would be nice to see if, hey, if it really caught it in the browser, but 365 and Google Workspace didn't really do it. So I was wrong on that one. And I think kind of continuing on this, I don't think anything will really come out for this more because I think with the whole AI buzz, there's now a new shiny object, and more on that later. But I don't know if we really do see the browser security thing. I think it's a almost an afterthought as the AI just dominates
Hmm.
everybody's forethinking. The next one I did was just because it was
Yeah,
easy.
yeah, this is a layup. Like, oof.
Breaches will happen, the tides will move. Yeah, I had to get one easy one, had to get one right. But definitely the prediction we did make for January was the AI empowered hackers to automate and scale. Anthropologic caught a nation state actor using its platform for being able to do attacks. And then if you caught one of our webinars last year, I did one with Huntress for where an adversary had, or criminal had downloaded Huntress onto the machine. So Huntress got a bunch of data about that machine, and what Huntress found was all the different tools that they used, and there was an overwhelming use of AI for the hackers to figure out where their targets should be. So the adversary did things like get me a list of the top real estate agents in California was one of his targets. Used a lot of translation services, and it appears that the attacker knew at least 4 or 5 languages in addition to English, Thai, Chinese, Korean, a few other ones. And there were some automated rootkits as well. And then as far as breaches, I think while the Cloudflare incident wasn't necessarily a breach, it was definitely an attempt to improve security, caused
Hmm.
major downtime. And then in our world, the firewall vendor SonicWall had a really major breach where all the backup files were broken into. But I only know that one just because we got intimately familiar with it from having to change a whole bunch of settings on everybody's firewalls. But the Fortinet had problems, Cisco had problems. I mean, it just seemed to be the year of the firewall for security problems this year. So it just really shows that the vendor breach is meant to hit the big fish of stealing credentials for, firewalls, caught little fish in the net. And we did see it because we saw not too long after, all of a sudden there were a whole bunch of VPN login attempts for a bunch of folks that use VPNs. So. Had to turn off a lot of location attempts from anything outside the United States. So that was an easy one. So again, I might not know the names, but I know it'll happen. And then this was another layup too. The AI takes over, and it did not happen as fast as I really thought it was going to. It accelerated very quickly, but the system showed its weaknesses very quickly, which in reality was mostly, I think I don't know if I mentioned it in the webinar, but in a lot of private conversations, I mentioned it that the weakness of AI is going to be the infrastructure that it rests on and the infrastructure that it rests on and the way that companies have organized their data and training and processes. So there's just so much, you could call it tribal knowledge, internal, exceptions to the rule that become the rule for how to get things done. And, just flipping a switch to say, hey, ChatGPT, here's my SharePoint OneDrive or my Google Drive or whatever, didn't really do as much as it was supposed to because it really highlighted how many different systems folks are drawing from to be able to get that information. So AI has really overhauled the, what folks were doing for search engine. It's completely replaced, people ChatGPT it before they Google it, and then Google, has tried to reclaim some of it by having the Gemini results first for it. But, you're really finding it that instead of finding templates and pieces, folks are jumping to the ChatGPT portion to it to kind of jump from there. And then, it hasn't been the true revolutionary promise. I mean, it's the same with the internet. These technologies are
Mhm.
not done in a day. There's a lot of institutional momentum to really get through. And you've seen a lot of really big firms turn it on for their front help desk portions for chatbots. Like Dell was a big one. But, they're infuriating to be perfectly honest. So you're sitting there with Dell and you're like, I'm an IT professional. Yes, I've restarted it. Yes, I've run the diagnostics. Yes, it's a problem with the motherboard. Just for the love of God, book the technician to come on site and swap the part. And just the thing just goes in circles and it's impossible to get it escalated. So you're just seeing some firms pull back from it. Some have some botched implementations. Microsoft thought it was going to sell a lot more Copilot than it did. And that's a fantastic example of just how poorly stuff is organized because I mean, I would argue Microsoft, at least in the business world, it sees everything from the operating system to the web browser to the documents you have. The Graph API that's in Microsoft has access to an ungodly amount of data, and their Copilot program is middling at best. Folks still pay for ChatGPT subscriptions. Folks still use Claude. So it's just so far, like anything, I don't think the progress is going to be that fast, but I think it's going to still keep continuing. And then the other one I saw was, hey, the silver wave, a lot of retirements, especially the solo practitioners, folks selling their businesses. And yeah, seen a lot of companies scrambling because of retirements or lost personnel. In fact, someone who's on this call today, I know for a fact had an unfortunate situation with losing an IT person unexpectedly. Not so, it can really leave folks scrambling, and having that succession planning is just as important as it's always been. And then still for, key people leaving, where does it put the department? Even outside of the IT portion for the silver wave, I'm seeing it just writ large for companies. I've got a manufacturing company that has a key personnel with a relationship with a government agency, and that person is like half retired and they don't know when they're finishing. Same company has a financial person that's half in, half out. I've got a CPA that has two people that they have to keep bringing back for tax time in order to keep up. There's just a lot for staying on top of there's so many institutional knowledge and not a lot of those replacements coming in that help for it. So it's just the succession planning is important and handling that situation of like, hey, you're a really important person to the team. But this new younger person is not here to take your job, but to help your job just because, hey, life happens. How it happens, it doesn't matter, but there'll be a day where somebody doesn't come in the office. Just simply is. And then for MSP consolidation, the retirements and private equity accelerating consolidation. Yep. Three peers last year, parts of mergers and acquisitions in 2025. and the bigger companies offer diverse services, but competition in the area can suffer, and the customer service of still struggling to see a lot of the ones that if they move into the bigger ones that they still keep up with their ability to provide the service. And some of it is, I know of one competitor that he was himself had two, three technicians. He just had brutal turnover in his technicians for a variety of reasons, and then just looked for a way out. Sold to an operator company that we had dabbled with briefly long before we were hiring technicians in the before time of way before COVID, called the 20, and went to the 20, and the requests were getting ignored, and that's how I got brought in. So that consolidation is still just continuing, but didn't do half bad. Three out of Was that 3 out of 5 for pretty right on the money. Some of them were
Mhm.
layups. Kind of knew what they were
Yeah.
coming because, as disruptive as it felt, it wasn't chaotic. Points on a trend line, and I think it just that there was a reason, even with the layups, that like, yep, the layup one still happened regardless of it. But after seeing that I batted 60%, which would for baseball would get me more than well into the Hall of Fame, and at least for the stock market, joke and trended here, I would have done pretty well. And try not to invest in the companies that we work with. I just feel like that's a little bit of a, mix.
Mhm.
But let's go ahead and look towards 2026. I think, unfortunately, on the IT front, I don't think things get easier. I think it's like everything else in our lives that we deal with, that things get more expensive, things get more complex, and the degree of trying to get control over it continues to be a problem. Just with right after COVID, with a lot of cyber attacks really rising, the insurance companies starting to dip their toe into it, there's just so much more litigation in the tech world. And especially because, the MSP world is not regulated. There's no licensure, there's no overseeing body. Anybody can hang a shingle and say, I'm an MSP and I can do your IT. It's not like any other type of firm that requires some type of credentials or anything like that. So that cost, unfortunately, is being passed on to consumers to a degree, and then coupled with just how complex it is. It used to just be IT was put a server in, hook the computers to the server and make some printers behave. And that's what my dad did for, gosh, 20 years. 25 years, and that was just fine. And now it's a whole different world of cloud and resources all over the place and sprawl, and it's going to continue to get more complex. And then trying to wrangle it will still be a big, tough part as well. But let's make some other fun predictions.
Mhm.
So, first and foremost, I don't think the smartphone killer comes out this year. I think Meta, sure, everybody's seen the advertisements that Meta is doing their damnedest for those Ray-Bans, for having the smart glasses. For those who maybe remember way back in the early 2000 teens, the Google Glass. I still think it's gonna be a hot minute, but just AI still lacks better interface. Nobody really wants to talk to a badge in the office of like, leaning down and talking to somebody. I've seen some folks with Claude as a recorder that then goes to an interface, but there's some
Mhm.
concerns there if you're wearing recording devices all the time. If like Massachusetts is a two-party state, that's why my phone, when you call a phone system, has calls are recorded twice so that like you can't say you didn't hear it. And that Massachusetts is a two-party state. How does that work if you have some type of recording device for an AI thing that's supposedly always listening? The wearables just still aren't there. I know the Humane pin, just that had some major problems with the battery. It was okay at best. You had to buy a cell phone subscription, so that's still not there. And just the little supercomputers in our pocket still remain the control surface and key. I just half hope that, something comes for, I'm A-okay having this thing and maybe have it be more battery and horsepower than it is screen, and then have some type of wearable that runs most of the AI portion. And I'm used to the weight of the thing, but it'd be nice to not be staring at the phone as much. That'd be pretty cool. And if you can kind of bring some of the VR piece to it, that would be nice. But I don't think that's this year. And then kind of even on that, I don't know if VR kind of comes into it. Yeah, some notes for what I've seen there. Smartwatch is just a phone accessory. Smart glasses, they've advanced a lot. I mentioned those Ray-Ban, the Meta Ray-Bans, and then the Humane pen just was a great idea and then just didn't really go anywhere. Now the next prediction, I know this is being recorded and I know that I am a
Hmm. Hmm.
Microsoft partner, but this is
Hmm.
mostly just based on kind of everything I'm hearing from folks out there that just Microsoft fatigue. Just I know they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room for any type of business IT for like from the desk on the from the machine on the desk to the email system to basic cloud systems to Azure, but really seeing a lot of folks getting very frustrated with, having to have an annual subscription. The annual subscription keeps carving pieces out for everything. The nickel and diming for it is just becoming, there's only so much recurring subscription that Microsoft can try and extract out of someone on a yearly basis before they throw their hands up. And coupled with performance and frustration too. It's the whole, it's like with the Windows 10 to Windows 11 upgrades, Windows 11 required certain hardware requirements and forced a lot of folks to replace machines, created a lot of e-waste. Windows 11 isn't exactly a fantastic operating system. It's not whiz-bang fast. It's throwing AI features in that folks didn't really ask for. There's just a lot of Microsoft has a vision and is trying to beat people into what that vision is rather than trying to enable folks to do what they need to do. And I think I would not be surprised if this year I get my first Microsoft to Google Workspace migration request outside of one that I already know is coming.
Hmm.
So, one client that works heavily with younger educators, they're very used to Google Workspace because the education space is dominated by Google Workspace. But Google made a license change this past year that said, all the prices for licenses are going up, whether you're flexible month to month or you're on the annual plans. However, the Gemini platform is just included. So whereas Microsoft, you pay $150 a year for business standard or 225 for, business premium or, God forbid, $645 for enterprise E5. And then on top of it, you would have to pay 200 something dollars for Copilot per person. Google went the route of just saying Copilot's included. Or, Gemini is
Yeah.
included, and then Gemini's benchmarking makes it really attractive. And then, Chromebooks, sure, we can. They're most Chromebook is really a device that just opens and then opens Google Chrome, but so many folks just work in Chrome all day. There's not a lot of other line of business applications. So if everything is like open three Chrome tabs, I don't know. That it could make sense that somebody moves to that Google Workspace piece. And then I can't believe I think too I might see a client that will roll out Linux for the same reason that I don't want any of the Google big cloud crap. I just want you know, I'm doing Microsoft 365 for just email. I'm sick of all the bloatware. And all I do is open computer, open web browser. Give me Linux. I don't want to pay for all these whatever. And I just need something light and good to go. So I wouldn't be surprised if I start seeing the first questions about Linux. And then maybe this is a longer question because there is rumors, and don't hold me to it. This is the crystal ball. So there are rumors of Microsoft moving Windows to a subscription so that if you want to
Oof.
even get into the Windows machine, you need to have some type of subscription to play with the business version of it. And the harbinger, I think of it, is if you have tried to set up a Windows machine recently, it will ask you for a Microsoft account under the guise of attempting to help you set it up easier. But I think that the real reason is to start that process of there's no such thing as a local account and the machine won't work unless it has an internet connection, and then make sure that your subscription is up to date to get you into the hardware that you bought. And I think that will be the straw that breaks the camel's back for, like, screw this, we're going to Linux. And for those of you that have thought about it and maybe get a little bit concerned about it, the big thing to think about is what software and tools you use on a regular basis. Compatibility with legacy software and files is a big one. So if you have anything custom, don't even think about it. Let's stay on the Windows, stay on whatever you have to keep going with it. And then maybe you start to think of if there's a legacy software or file, start to get those converted to something that, runs. The way to think of it is it runs on anything. It can run on a phone, can run on a Chromebook. If it just runs in the web browser, I think you're good to go. And the desktop functionality and offline, Google's productivity environment's great from a browser, but if you need horsepower for anything graphics, a lot of engineering, not really going that way. And then also is the wonderful part of trying to get staff to get used to Linux, opening a machine and having it look completely different. Because I can tell you from my experience, moving from Outlook Classic to Outlook New, the
Yeah.
overwhelming user feedback is they despise New Outlook despite the fact that it is no different. And it just, frankly, is a little cleaner and the colors
Mm.
look different. And I've heard everything from the coloring looks childish to it doesn't do what I need it to do, with the immediate question of, well, what is it that you need it to do, with no legitimate answer back. They couldn't tell me what feature that was lacking because it would be
Yeah.
like, well, it is over here.
Yeah, or
Uh,
they like reorder the order of like some of the buttons, and you just have that muscle memory of like, oh, I need to put an attachment on this. Now it's at a
and
slightly different place.
one
Then
thing
the
that
world
is
falls
missing in
apart.
Outlook New that I'm surprised more folks didn't catch up on was that you could do hotkeys for quickly sorting emails, which was nice, and that went away, which is unfortunate. But that's really the only thing I'm aware of. But so far, none of my users have brought it up to me of like, that's a thing that's gone that I need back. And I personally have moved to the webmail because I was sick of Outlook not wanting to open every once in a while. But all that really
Hmm.
to say is for if you are thinking of getting off the Microsoft train, carefully consider the cost of switching. And then the other one that I think will be really interesting, especially as some of the younger generations graduating college and coming into the workforce. And this one again might be the next couple of years. AI coding tools maturing internally. So there's a thing you need that does this one job, and you have to pay $60 a month for it. A fantastic example is we have something that automates our LinkedIn outreach, and it's one software package. It costs this much. And it's just, or, hey, I need something to take the list of contacts I have in our CRM and make sure that, they're still in business and I have the right person. The kids are getting really good at AI coding tools, and they take to it very quickly. And the AI overwhelmingly is best at home in the code world. And as organizations grow this software fatigue of, I need yet another freaking software package to do this for another $60, I would not be surprised if organizations start to get internal folks that just do. You effectively have an internal DevOps team. What was outsourcing to somebody once upon a time is now a relatively normal employee, same as like your bookkeeper or anything that would just say, hey, I just wrangle the software tool. So while SaaS, the past, gosh, let's call it 10 years, really has exploded and, everything has moved to a software subscription, which is another big one that I hear overwhelmingly that folks despise. There can be some huge advantage to building it internally. Now, it comes with risks, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but I think the build versus buy conversation starts to really open up, especially as the barrier to entry of coding has lowered significantly because the AI tools allow folks to punch way above their weight class. And then because the tech giants don't need those folks in their organizations, those folks are now looking for jobs. I think you'll start to see them come into SMB to be able to help out with these type of things. But there's risks to vibe coding and doing it yourself. Security is a big one. If you have something that's a login online, how are you going to make sure there's an MFA? And especially if you host anything sensitive, making sure that somebody can't just go sneak past a login and get to all the sensitive fun stuff. There's documentation, hey, how is the knee bone connected to the hip bone? If this breaks, what do I do? And this is true for anything that you build internally. Just I've seen this at a lot of clients that have the internal pieces, that how things are set up. You really need to make sure that that's documented in case it has to be passed on to the next person. Maintenance, making sure that there isn't something in how the thing is set up that would, oh, hey, if this one Java package suddenly goes out of date, this whole thing goes sideways. How do you make sure somebody's keeping up with that? Another great example is I have a client that has an incident recording software that's from the year 2000 and is written in a coding language from the 90s, and the language cannot comprehend that a hard drive is bigger than 4 GB, and it's just hasn't been maintained. So then there's ownership. Was it something that an intern built and the intern's gone on to something else and it's a tool you've been using and then you just kind of run, how important does that tool become? Does somebody own it? Does the person who own it know enough about the other three pieces to be able to keep going with it? So vibe coding has its value, but it's just like any other key position. If you're going to build versus buy, you want to make sure that key position has the same coverage that we talked about earlier with those retirements. And then a couple other little rapid fire tidbits too. Insurance costs is going to drive way more IT decisions. That, just the the risks of something happening, the fact that so many insurance companies got their face ripped off, just like for so many organizations that are trying to mitigate risk and watching what they're doing, cyber insurance is really going to be the key for make you know making decisions against, because the insurance at least highlights a degree of risk and makes it real. Same way any of us have for it, errors and omissions or something like that. The fatigue with multi-factor will continue to grow just because it'll turn on in more places, and especially too, I'm curious to see how the MFA problem truly gets solved, because I've seen plenty of folks that have MFA enabled and still get their credentials stolen. And then my other favorite one, the best decisions are still going to be boring. The boring stuff works. Doing it right the first time, making the investment, just the boring stuff works. It keeps working because it just does not need to be flashy, does not need to be crazy. Hit the fundamentals and you'll be good to go. As my dad used to say, the settlers get the arrows and as pioneers get the arrows and settlers get the gold. So, and then what will 2026 reward? Just a solid strategy, sticking to your core always beats a shiny new tool. You know, under, I know that my industry, just kind of thinking about it, I'm sure that somebody's going to be releasing an AI chatbot for the front portion of it, but just being heard, having a human, that service and human touch for us is still going to be overwhelmingly the most important piece to do. And then just staying clear on the goals. There's just the distractions are not decreasing, they're still increasing. So keeping that clarity is going to keep everybody on the right path. Because I know for me, I got a whiteboard right over there, has everything that I'm supposed to focus on. And sure, little ideas pop into my head like everybody else, but they go to the bottom of the list. I mean, it's very similar to traction issue list. They go over there, and then just I have my rocks that for the quarter, got to hammer in on and make sure that I'm good to go for. So that's been the big one. And with that, are there any questions from the intrepid souls who've made it this far for listening through? Feel free to drop something in the webinar chat if you got a question, or Ryan, if you have any.
Well, one thing I was thinking about generally is we're talked about like Microsoft fatigue and subscription fatigue. Is there a good way to kind of audit or really think about how you're using these products and whether or not it might be worth switching? Because I know, you have all these business licenses and there's 50 different programs that have all these capabilities. And the capabilities are great, but like maybe, no one's using Power BI or making pivot tables or all of these things you can do within like Excel or PowerPoint. And you'd be equally served by like Open Office or Google Workspace. Is there like, what are the ways that a business can look at actual usage and determine if they're, using the right products for the right job?
That's a great question. It comes down to having control over the processes, understanding what it is that folks are doing in their role and how they're getting the job done. Because again, it's that all these are really tools to get a specific job done. So if you look at
Mhm.
the job and what's required to get it done, I mean, you might have a lot of institutional momentum. I've always used Excel, so I'll continue to use Excel. Google Sheets doesn't do what I need it to do, which I don't know about you, but I popped open Google Sheets in my personal account recently and found out I could write macros. So that was an eye-opening one. And then, the Gemini in Google Sheets was another eyebrow-raising one as well. But I think a lot of it is just thinking about the actual job that you do, the process that's there, and what tool will best serve it. Now, chances are there's probably thousands of processes in what folks do day in, day out. Like, one example is a client did switch to Open Office from Microsoft Office because they were opening very basic spreadsheets. And then anything that was collaborative was within their Google Workspace environment. And then it was two finance people hung on to their Excel licenses because there was, well, keep the finance people happy, right? So some of that might have just been that, like, that's the way we've always done it. And especially too, some of it is just in looking at these processes, I mean, a great way to start because it's the easiest way to get immediate return is looking at what you currently have and currently paying for. So there should be, if you're using QuickBooks, there should be a very easy way to see which vendors are reoccurring and looking at a lot of those reoccurring transactions and saying, all right, there's a recurring transaction here, there's one here, there's one here. What does that tool do? Is this redundant to another tool? Maybe somebody signed up for Calendly a long time ago, and Microsoft Bookings would be a better option for it because it's built into 365 license that you have. Because Microsoft overwhelmingly will buy a lot of other companies to bolt on a capacity that they haven't built internally. Like OneDrive was originally SkyDrive. Bookings was another one that was some other company. So they'll buy companies and bolt them on to get things done. But also, too, there are competitive products because maybe those tools don't do what they need to do. And there is still a market that shows that there's still space for these things somewhere else. But I would start first with the like taking an inventory of the tools that you have. And who knows, maybe you go through, you look at something, and you go, oh, why am I paying for, well, there's stuff all over the place. What's going on here? And we never canceled that. Like we bought a subscription for that intern like 2 years ago. I was, oh shoot, like you should have. So now I think auditing the subscriptions that you have and then taking that inventory, that'll help at least immediately for maybe cutting a couple bucks here and there, which will make it worth your while. And then from there, examining those processes. What are folks doing? Why are they using Excel? And just seeing the frontliners and what the folks in the front line are doing. And then, will the tool have at least a reasonable chance going forward to be able to help you do your job better? I mean, I will admit, as much as I poo-poo Copilot and call it middling, what I have found is it has some advantages working within Microsoft Excel that ChatGPT does not have so far. Like you can ask some questions against the CSV file in ChatGPT pretty well, but Copilot so far of like, I need a table, I need it sorted this way, has some pretty nice advantages for being able to format in there. It's still okay at best, but it's not export from one program, drag it to another. It's at least in the hopper for, it's right there. So some of it too, I think, will be what platform is going to span enough and give you something that can attempt to work in concert. I actually have to shout out one of my clients, Bravo Payroll, I think does a fantastic job of this. And this has been a long, hard journey for them to get all of their data, information, processes, and working into a monolith of a great system. And they took the time and did the work to get it to go. And just because they're on the call, I'm not sucking up for them. I've told them this privately as well, but try and praise public, criticize private, right? The but the way they've brought everything into a single pane of glass is truly nothing short of impressive, and it is not easy because it's just easier to slap a fix. We have a booking problem, slap
Mhm.
appointment core on. This is mostly me making fun of myself, but hey, we have a problem with LinkedIn, like LinkedIn outreach, slap, hey, Albert on. Hey, I have a problem with this. The duct tape ball grows as you go along. So stopping, taking an inventory of their recurring tools is always a good idea. And be wary of the ones that renew annually.
Right. Looks, I don't see any other questions. So Thanks everyone for coming by, and we'll see you again next year.
Awesome. Yeah, we try and do these once a month.